Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. I'm here today with art prof teaching artist Jordan McCracken-Foster, and we are critiquing your artwork today. We've got two pieces. This first one is a crochet sculpture by Heather Sanchez, and we also have a second piece, which is an acrylic painting by Beth Hopper. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques and tutorials. All right, let's hear a little bit about Beth before we actually take a look at her work. And you guys can go down into the video description below and you have Beth's artist statement as she talks about how she's a self-taught artist, mostly working in acrylic painting, but also does watercolor. Also, you guys pay attention to the fact this is a big painting. This painting is 36 inches by 46 inches. So this is not a small piece by any means. And so she talks about in the video description about how it's an image of peonies, which are frequently seen in art. But what she really likes about the peonies is that it's how the blooms form. The peonies, apparently, they cannot blossom fully without the help of ants. And so what happens is the ants physically pull the outside layers away from the petals in order to allow them to unfold. So I'm curious, Jordan, did you know that about peonies?
I didn't even know how to pronounce it. So all this is brand new territory for me.
So when you look at Beth's piece, do you feel like you see that narrative?
There's the section there where she's talking about the ants and how they interact with the flower. I see that very clearly, and I think that it's the way that the composition is connected with the pink of the flower and it's connecting to each of the ants. I think that's actually helping it a
Well,
lot.
see, I sort of feel like the ants are just crawling on it. I'm not so sure that I see the collaborative effort that Beth is talking about. I mean, I had no idea either. I thought it was the strangest relationship. Like, how did this get started between the ants and the peonies? It's so weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Hey, Claire, I noticed there's people in the chat
Okay,
saying they
I
can't
actually
hear
fixed
me.
that because I had
Um,
you muted for a second, but you should be
oh, okay.
visible now.
Okay, okay. Um, so going back to the piece, I saw the comments. I was like, I don't want them to miss anything. No, I think that this actually looks really really cool, and I appreciate just how the composition is framed in such a way where you can see that whole thing, and just the topic of or just the idea of having flowers and not having it just be a regular like here's something that I thought was pretty. There's a whole story to it about how the ants open it up. I think that's actually really clever.
And looking up close at Beth's painting, oh, Beth is in the chat. Very cool. So apparently, Beth, you are weird hybrid. Okay. So Kira send me all of weird hybrids comments. I really like it when the artist is in the chat because it's great to have that interactive conversation. Beth, I'm really curious how you came to understand this relationship. For example, are you a gardener? Do you grow peonies? Did you read about this somewhere? Because, Jordan, what I really like about this piece is the specificity of it. It's not just here's a flower. There's actually something happening
Yeah.
in this scene that I really, really enjoy. Now, Jordan, what about the ants themselves? How do you feel about the way they're articulated in the painting?
Um, I I think that they're really close. I think the intention is there, and I like the shine, but they're also put towards the outer rim of the flower blooming itself, and it actually, if you don't know that they're there, you could very easily miss them. So I would like to see some of the ants just move just a little bit towards the middle, where it would feel like they were like really opening up the petals. And it would also connect them with the focal point of the area, which is the pink of the flower.
I sort of wonder if maybe the interaction of the ants and the petals is not three-dimensional enough. So what I mean by that is all three of the ants, they're just sitting there. And I imagine, I mean, I don't know what this would look like in real life, but I would think that maybe you would have a couple that are going under one of the petals or one that's maybe
Yeah.
circling around. And so something where we really feel the ants really going and touching that surface. Because to me, the direction of the ants right now, they feel a little bit passive. And I don't know if this is a very violent situation, pulling back the petals, or if it's a little bit more delicate, but a little bit more information about that, I think might be good. Now, Jordan, what about composition? How do you feel about the layout of the painting?
Um, I feel like it's a little too centered for something of this subject matter. And when I think of flowers, I think of, things growing out of the ground or in a pot or whatever the case is. And I almost wish that flower were more towards the top of the painting. Like if we zoomed out maybe just a tiny bit and had the stem cover maybe, I don't know, the bottom two-thirds, and the top third was that petal, and you see the ants going around it. I think that would make it more successful because it's supposed to be, in my understanding, it's supposed to be representing new life and let's get closer to the sun. Let's bloom. Let's show everybody what we're all about. And I feel like that's missing when you have it centered and cropped in so much like this.
Beth is saying, my mom is an avid gardener, always has been, and she shared this story with me. That's great because the fact that you have a personal connection with this story, Beth, I think it's like you can feel that. It's not like you just went on Google and read some random fact and decided to make an image. I just feel like anytime you have a personal connection, it just deepens the meaning of the piece and how you relate to it. And Beth is also saying this was actually based off a photo reference. This is exactly where the ants were when I took the photo. Okay, so I would say, Beth, just because the ants were there, it doesn't mean you have to keep them there. Jordan, how would you recommend that? Because photo references are really, really useful. I really need them a lot. I rely on photo references to really get the raw information I need. But can you talk maybe a little bit about how to depart from the photo reference a little bit more?
Yeah, and so the main issue is not whether photo reference is okay or not. It's more about how closely should you rely on it, and at what point should you put your own spin on it. And I would say that, like, let's say you're drawing the human figure. 9 times out of 10, you're going to want that figure to be anatomically correct, unless you're doing something really out there and bizarre. So you can rely on photo references for that, but maybe you want a slightly different pose. Maybe you want something to be more exaggerated, and then that's when you could put your own spin on it. Or maybe you want them to be wearing different clothing. So the same thing could apply here, where you have the ants in position on the flower. That's great. What would happen if you were to just take that ant and just move it an inch or two towards the left? It's not really, you're not really departing from your reference. It's still there. You're just shifting it slightly to make a better
Another
image.
thing, Beth, is that I'm a really big fan of using multiple references because what I see a lot is when people use a photo reference, they really take the composition with them. And so just because the photo is laid out that way doesn't necessarily have to make it that way. And then the other thing is sometimes the photo doesn't quite give you everything you need. For example, you could get images of ants that are not on peonies, and maybe there's a particular position of an ant that you think is maybe better for telling your story. So I'm a big fan of mixing different photos because usually that gives you a little bit more variety and a little bit more control over how it's put together. Okay, Jordan, let's talk about the color of this piece because the inside of the flower is super saturated, but actually the vast majority of the piece is dominated by green and then a little touch of brown in the background.
So I think the one thing I would do to really help this is add a blue glaze over the background, because right now you have all this green, and green is, first of all, just a very difficult color to paint with in general. There's, it's it's very hard to manage that. And right now you have everything competing. So if you were to take some blue or either a purple or something like that, and just lightly go over areas that are not in the focal point, it pushes that back, it brings the flower forward, and it helps us to understand the depth much more
At
clearly.
the same time, another option, if you want, is to go really almost reddish, not pink the way that the flower is, but the complementary color is green. And so, if you, for example, took some burnt sienna, that would be another option to do that. Because I think the thing about color that a lot of people don't realize is it's not about finding the right brown. It's what does that brown look like next to the green? You have to think about it as a relationship that you're building between those colors. Ripple of Aqua saying, I can tell if the background texture, oh, I can't tell if the background texture is too much or not enough for me. It's hanging in this nebulous area where I'm wanting more clarification or way less to solely focus on the subject. Yeah, I feel that the texture in the background in the brown, it's actually pretty similar to the green that's on the right hand side. Now, on the other hand, I love the texture in this piece. Like, I don't know, Jordan, if you can see the veins that are actually in the leaves
Mhm.
of the peony, that they're hard to see in the slide, but they're definitely in there.
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate those. That was actually one of the first details I noticed. I was like, oh wow, I don't think I've seen that very often, especially on Art Prof, where someone goes into that kind of minute detail for
Well,
flowers.
Beth, I will say also, though, I sort of like that patch of green in the upper right hand corner because it's really textured and loose. And I feel that that's a good relationship between some of the crisper, better defined areas of the peony leaf. So I really enjoy that a lot. I do feel like the leaves at the bottom, though, those really feel like they're painting in a completely different style. And I wish that those would actually push back a little bit more because those really crisp lines, to me, they almost feel like the leaf is cut up and they just don't fit how bulbous and satisfying the center area is. I don't know. What do you think about that, Jordan?
Yeah, the leaves do bother me, especially the one on the bottom right. I feel like if the ones on the left were didn't have as much white mixed in, that I could believe that a little bit more. But the ones on the bottom right definitely take me out of the piece. And something else I also wanted to say about the background is the scale of this flower and these ants are so small. And I feel like I would expect to see other grass, like little grass petals or shreds, like all these, like everywhere. I'm not exactly sure what that is in the background because it's supposed to be grass and they're on the same level. It's not really, they're not reading at the same scale, if that makes sense.
Sterling Richards is saying, do you need a medium to create a glaze or do you water the paint down? I think, Sterling, the better option other than water, I mean, you can use water, but if you guys watch our acrylic painting tutorial, one of the materials that Alex Rowe uses is matte medium. And matte medium is nice because it has a little bit more body than water. And the thing about water is the water sort of breaks down the paint, but the medium just is a little bit more substantial. And so you can do the glaze without really breaking the paint down. Let's see, Beth is saying, you're not wrong about the leaves being mismatched with the rest of the piece. It's an alternative to white for lightening up the highlights. Well, actually, Beth, what I was going to bring up is because I'm going to assume the peony is outdoors, that I wish there was a more clear sense of what time of day it is. Because depending if it's noon and it's bright sunlight, it's very different light. Now, if this is in the early evening, the light's going to be really diffused and very weak because you don't have bright light. And so, depending on the lighting situation, you may want to make the highlights have a little tinge of yellow. You might have them have a little tinge of cerulean blue. You have suggestions, Jordan, for the highlights?
Um, I would, so for highlights, I think the thing that we brought up was that there's so much white in there, and I would save that for last for sure because you want to build up, and as Clara was saying about changing, deciding the type of light that you have, so whether it's going to be a cerulean blue or a yellow or whatever that is, you really have to determine that, and that goes for every painting that you do. because unless you're just doing a straight line drawing, the rest of the painting is going to fall apart if you don't have that clear in your head. Um, and I know sometimes that specificity can be often annoying when you're creating the artwork to keep it in your head all the time, but it's those little things that we constantly aren't aware of in real life that makes things look real. So you really have to
Beth,
consider
I
those
was thinking
things.
another option, if you want the highlights to be a little bit more prominent, you can play with the thickness of your paint. So if you look at Edward Hopper, he's a really good example because if you look at his paintings in real life, you'll notice that the highlights, he really builds up the paint very thick. So it's thick, it's opaque, and then he might say, for example, in the brown background in your upper left-hand corner, do just a wash. And so the thing is, a wash cannot compete with thick, bright, white highlights. And so it's not just a color issue. I also think it's somewhat the degree of transparency and opacity that you end up putting into the piece. So Beth is saying the veins were less detailed, just a really thin stroke of the darker green and the lighter shade layered on top to read as raised. Well, I think that's the way it should be, Beth. I think those highlights should be the very last thing that you stick in there. I have trouble with details a lot of times because that's sort of what dazzles people is they go, "Ooh, look at the details." I mean, have you heard that before, Jordan?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you were to think about it like this, like when you have a car, some of the most important things on there are the things that you don't see at first, like the engine or the axles or whatever. Um, People often buy a car because the paint, on or the color of the car, or whatever. But that's not what's important, and so that's kind of the same role that the highlights and the little details would take. They're really important. They definitely draw you in, but it's not ever going to replace all the things that you have underneath the surface.
So, Neighborhood Cat is saying, "What's your take on the black outlining?" I think for me, the black outline, it's fine in a lot of areas, but I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the crispness of those two leaves in the lower right hand corner. I feel like the leaf in the lower right hand corner almost looks like an insect wing. There's this odd shape and pattern to it, and that may well be what that leaf actually looks like, but it sticks out a little bit too much. If you guys would like to have your work critiqued on our YouTube channel, you can submit your artwork. So all you need to do, just go to artprof.org and click on critiques, and there is a submission form for you guys to fill out. Okay, let's move on. We're going to look at Heather's piece. And if you guys go down to the video description, there's some really cool stuff that Heather talks about. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of background. And so Heather's talking about that she creates her own crochet patterns. Oh my God, that sounds really hard. And so she's trying to combine fibers, colored yarns, and she also did not want to make a kitschy looking doll. And so she's talking about she wants her artwork to fit in well with the contemporary art world. Although she likes it, she's always been interested in historical costumes. She was inspired by Regency area fashions while creating the doll. And she explains that the words next to the doll, it says high society, signifies the power of language. She thinks ideas sound more tangible when they're placed on a physical surface. The words are little uneven, unsophisticated. She wanted the words to have a mysterious quality. Lower and middle class people may be unaware of how the wealthy experience the world. So she says the doll's supposed to symbolize the connection of prosperity and an unstressed life. The doll's smiling, eyes are beaming. She's unstressed by her financial situation, and her tranquil life prevents her from fully understanding the underprivileged. Wow, that is awesome. That's really a lot that you're digging into, Heather. So, Jordan, what's your first impression?
After reading all that, I look at this doll and I think it's really fantastic. I love the patterning and it's so well done. It doesn't feel like anything's out of place. And it's almost unfair of me to say this, but I wish we had another doll that would contrast the high society that we have, because I feel like the whole thing that you're saying is there's a contrast between the high society and people who are lower class. And when you just have one there as a representative, I don't want to say it takes away, but it definitely is a longing for something else too. Not to take away anything from what you've created already, but I really think that that should be the next step to really push
Well,
this
I
piece
can say
forward.
that oftentimes, if you're trying to make a statement about something, having something as the foil or the opposite, I think enhances the message a little bit more. I mean, you can see that in terms of artwork and scale. Like, if you want to make an apple look really big, it doesn't help to just paint an apple and say, oh, it's big. But if you paint an apple and you put a tiny person next to it, you really understand how big the apple is. And so I agree that I think we need to see a contrast between what is the difference. I love the doll though. I think it's so strange. And I mean that as a compliment. I don't know. What do you think, Jordan?
I think it's really cool. Like you said, it's kind of, there is something strange about it, but at the same time, it also feels familiar somehow. Like I feel like I would recognize who this would represent, and I don't want to compare it to like a voodoo doll or something like that, but I just get this sense that there's someone very specific in mind that she's basing this off of. I don't know who that is. I don't know who, who that person could be, but I just feel like there's someone there who's like the surrogate.
Michael Frisbee is saying, for my taste, already seems like too much symbolism for a single piece of artwork. Well, I think you've got a good point there, Michael, because sometimes what I see in my students' work, they're trying to pack in the Civil War into one image, which is really, really hard. But there's a way to do it. I think there's a way to niche down, but still convey it. There's a lot to dig into. I mean, we're going to talk about the text in a little bit, but it could just be the organization of the idea and not so much that it's too big of a concept. Danya is saying, reminds me of Nellie from Little House on the Prairie. I can't remember who Nellie is. Danya, can you tell us? Did you ever read Little House on the Prairie, Jordan?
No,
That's my
I
sister's
know nothing.
favorite book. Did you know she reads it every single year? That this is her ritual, is to read those books. Oh, cool. Heather is
Wow.
in the chat. Heather, we'd love to hear more about the piece. Anything that you would like to share with us is always super, super useful. Jordan, I'm trying to place the doll in terms of time period. I mean, the hairdo is pretty specific, and we have a hat that doesn't look like
Mhm.
just any hat. And actually, the checkerboard thing at the bottom, I can't tell. Is that an apron? I don't know. What do you think that is?
Yeah, I was reading Apron. To me, it feels like early America almost, like someone in the 17 or 1800s, just with the bonnet and the very specific style of everything. Um, and of course, part of it is also due to the way it was made. But that would be my first guess. The only thing that may or may not be early America is the earrings, but I've never looked up earrings in early America, how popular they were. So that I could just be, you guys could prove me wrong, or I don't know. But that's what I'm getting.
Well, I actually have to say, I find the earrings a little bit distracting. I don't mind that the figure has earrings. I just feel like they look so similar to the eyes. They're the exact same color, they're the exact same size. And so I just think a color change there would be enough, or if you change the shape of the form, I think that might be fine. Okay, Danya is saying Nellie is the daughter of the shipkeeper. She was snotty because she thought she was better than the other kids. Oh, interesting. And Allison is saying blonde, tightly curled hair. I see where you're coming from when you say it reminds you of Nellie. And Sterling Richards is asking, what's the thinking behind the cylindrical body shape? All right, cool. Jordan, what do you think about the body shape?
The first thing I thought of, I don't know the name of it, but there's like these toys or these objects where it's like one like doll inside of another, and they just keep going, get smaller and smaller.
Oh,
That's the first thing
the
I thought of. I don't know what
Russian
it's called.
stacking dolls.
Check. Yes, yes, those. Thank you. So that's the first thing that reminded me of. But in terms of the shape, I'm not really sure why that decision was made. It could just be for simplicity. It kind of reminds me of uh, the guy who's singing "I'm Just a Bill." Yes, I'm only a Bill, like the School of Rock. You know what I'm talking
Wait,
about?
are you talking about the movie that has Jack Black
that,
in
that
it?
No, 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 school, like the really old school cartoon where they're teaching kids about the Constitution and
Oh,
stuff. It's
right,
a
right. Yeah,
cartoon,
that
and
I watched that on TV, Jordan.
yeah. Does it kind of feel like
I
that
don't
to you a
know.
little
That's
bit?
not really what I thought of, but anyway, I
That's the
want to
shape.
show
That's the.
actually.
That's just what it.
We have a couple artists who are really different than Heather, but I think one thing that comes across in terms of the material is the crochet, because crochet is such a repetitive technique, and so I think Heather, you might try looking at Ruth Asawa. And Ruth Osawa, to me, she's such a underappreciated artist, and I love her work. I think it's really, really elegant, and I don't know exactly what the stitch was that she used, but I really feel like, in a way, these really are knitted sculptures. And I just was thinking they might be good for you to look at because they are a little bit more diverse in terms of shape. And I just feel like right now, if I look at the cylindrical shape, it's a little bit limiting because there's no real gesture to the figure. Like, we don't really know how would that gesture, how would that figure move. The Osawa pieces, they're way more whimsical, but they have a feeling of gesture. They do have a sense of weight. And I wonder if maybe in Heather's piece, that's really what might be missing from it. And then I want to show Natalie Maibach, who I have actually worked with in the past. She's a Boston based artist, and she makes these incredible woven sculptures. She's a basket weaver, but these are, oh my gosh, baskets on steroids. They're incredible. And she actually bases them on weather patterns. And so there's a whole chart of shapes that correspond with different pieces of weather information. But I just think Ruth Osawa and Natalie Maibach, they're really good examples of using that knitted texture, but then I think taking it a step further beyond that. Neil is saying, I'm dabbing into European fashion history, and a lot of the focus is in the silhouette of the dress. And Ripple of Aqua says, I'm a little confused because when I saw the piece, I read apron, linking to maid or servants, but that didn't make sense when explained to represent a higher class of living. Yeah, what do you think about the apron, Jordan?
Yeah, that's yeah. That would definitely be something that would catch my eye as well, especially for the narrative that's being told. And if it's going to be high society, I think that's something really fancy would definitely help. Like the artist you just show with all the round shaped sculptures. I think her name is Ruth. You know, one of the things I really liked about those is that it feels it feels very loose and gestural, like you mentioned. And I think in something like this, that the silhouette, if the silhouette were different, it would be much clearer to figure out, okay, this person is high class, this is, you know, in lower class communities, and you could really vary up how you tell that story just by shape alone. And that's something that you see, you know, character design or in clothing, or even if you look at like children's toys, like really little kids, all the shapes are not sharp, they're very round. One's for the safety of the kids, but also because it's just appealing, you know. So I think if you play with those in the overall silhouette, I think that could really help push
Kate
it.
Chandler is saying, I like that the outfit's the most complex element of the piece. The person so basic brings attention to the superficialities of that display of wealth. Cool. That's a really good point. Jordan, what about the sign? High society, sitting right next to the figure. How do you think that plays into the composition?
I I'm not a huge fan of that simply because I like the idea of show don't tell. And when you just have it written, this is high society, I feel like it sort of takes away the I'm not sure. There's a mystery to it that I feel like the audience is missing when they have something like that, and it also feels very separate. It'd be one thing if it was like she was standing on a star or something like that that would represent, or maybe you could do something like she's standing on a really fancy looking rug or something like that, and then maybe when you do the poorer class uh, piece, then you could have that one be you know, raggedy and jagged and stuff like that. So I think we could find a way to really tell people that this is high society without actually literally writing it out
Well, I
for
also
us.
think it's a material issue because the thing is, every single part of the piece is made out of crochet, and that piece of paper or cardstock, whatever it is, that is an anomaly in this piece, and it just feels really out of place. And so I like this idea of, okay, if you are going to use that text, maybe try to integrate it into the figure, or maybe it's something that's incorporated into that mat that the figure is sitting on top of. And I agree with you. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
being told what to see. It's saying this is high society. And I think to a certain degree, when you explain things so much, it takes away the mystique of the image and you become a lot less curious. Like, you ever watch these movies where they all of a sudden realize that they haven't explained stuff and there's some character that sums up everything that's going on? I just find that the most annoying thing.
Yeah, it's frustrating. No one likes those movies.
Let's see. Jordan is saying it almost seems like a completely separate piece than the doll. Yeah, and then another thing I would consider, Heather, is how you photograph the work. For 3D work makes a huge difference. I mean, depending on how you photograph stuff, it can almost look like a different piece. So I would really recommend, if you go to artprof.org and you click on tutorials and you go to the complete art school portfolios guide, we have a whole section that lays out the options that you have in terms of photographing work, how you do backgrounds and stuff like that. Because I actually find this green wall with lines on it, it makes it hard for me to see the piece. Like, it actually makes the green feel very dull and washed out. Now, picture this: if you put the sculpture on a black background, then think about how the white of that crochet is going to just pop. I think that could be another option. Or what if high society is knocked over? I mean, there's a lot of options there. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I think all those are great ideas, and it all goes back to, how you want people to feel when you look at it without you having to tell us. Now, you could have the title of the piece on the little artist statement on the side be, high society versus poor society or whatever. But when you put this piece behind something that doesn't make it stand out so much, we're not going to get the message as clearly. So I think that's a great suggestion to have this be on a darker background so those lighter colors can pop, and vice versa for the imagined uh, the imagined poor society piece that you're going to do.
I mean,
Hopefully,
Heather, my suggestion would be just to get rid of the high society part because I don't think you need it. I feel that the doll in itself is so odd and interesting, and the high society is just not necessary. So you can think about that. It's hard because when you've spent so much time making something and thinking about it, to be told, hey, get rid of half the piece, that's not the easiest thing. But you might actually just take a couple photos without the high society sign and just look at it, because you might see it in the photo and realize, oh, wow, that really doesn't look that great. Or you could take the doll and the sign and move them around, like try posing them in different ways. I mean, with photography, it's really easy to explore those options. We have an Art Prof Share today, which I'm excited to show you guys. The Art Prof Share is from, oh, I don't know how to pronounce this name. I'm so bad with all these names. Zom Arif. And you can look at Zom's artist statement in the video description below. And they are saying, I've been watching your videos. They've helped me progress, find myself, and they're exploring this new style. But the videos and the basics of portraiture still apply here. I think I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without your videos. So the videos that Zom is referring to, there's this Benedict Cumberbatch video. This makes me want to watch Sherlock over and over and over again. It's about his cheekbones and also portrait mistakes that a lot of people make. And we also have this other video, which is tips on how to actually compose a portrait. So, Jordan, we have several pieces by Zom here. What's your impression?
I really like these. I've always been attracted to the style where it's loose yet controlled at the same time. And to be honest, I've never had the courage to try it out for myself. And so when I see these, I love the just how loose they are, but I can also tell exactly where all the values are going. It feels I can see the planes, and I think it's really really awesome, and I want to see more of these.
Yeah, I really like, Zom, that you were able to take fundamental ideas that we explore in these tutorials, but at the same time, this is your voice. This is definitely your style, and it's not like you lifted this from our tutorial directly. And I really enjoy the way that you're actually applying the concepts. I mean, Jordan, you and I talk a lot about anatomy because we're big nerds, but it's sort of like a lot of people can know the anatomy, but they don't know how to actually use it. Like, how do you actually implement that stuff? Like, do you think that's common?
Oh yeah, it's a very challenging thing because, in my opinion, I think the human figure is the most difficult thing to master. Like, period. Human beings are much more complex than cars and planes, even though they're bigger and weirdly shaped and all that. Humans are so unique. They're so different. There's no two that are exactly the same. And to master that and to get a feeling of authenticity when you're trying to create it is very, very
Ripple
difficult.
of Aqua saying, I love how connected I feel with this piece. The lines make me feel as if the person is looking back at me, is really thinking and processing. Jordan, the one that I'm really struck by is the one where the face is way smaller and it's got sort of an elongated neck. And I think what I really like about this one that's different than the others is I really feel like the portrait is in a space. Whereas I look at some of the other ones and they're so focused on just the face that it actually starts to feel a little bit flat compared to this other one where I really feel like Zom's creating an atmosphere. I feel like I know what the air feels like in that. And I think that's a real
Yeah.
accomplishment to be able to contextualize the figure, to put it somewhere, because, we can't just keep drawing these floating people. It just gets a little bit old after a little while. Okay. Sorry, I was on mute for a second. If you guys have something that you create in reaction to one of our tutorials, we would love to see it. And so if you want to be considered for a YouTube shout out, just go to artprof.org and click on tutorials. And if you look at the purple button that's on the left-hand side, that is going to take you to the submission form and you can submit your information there. Or if you just want to show us, which is fabulous, we love it, tag us on Instagram at art.prof and use hashtag #ArtProfShare. And you guys who follow us on Instagram, you probably know that we share a lot of these on our stories. So that's something that's a little bit more casual that some of you guys might want to think about. Please join us on Discord. The link is in the video description below. And Jordan and I are going to be over there in a few minutes to chat with you guys because we love it. And subscribe to our channel so you join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters, guys. We've been so overwhelmed by your support that's been happening between the raffle, over my announcement about my transition, leaving RISD, moving on to Utah, and you guys really putting in your support to make sure that we stay alive. Jordan, how has it felt to see this surge of support?
I think that's every artist's dream is to have people who appreciate what they do when they're trying to teach and when they're trying to show their work. And this is just overwhelming. We constantly are receiving updates from Clara about how exciting this is, about how Art Prof is really growing. And so yeah, it's great. Thank you guys so much for all that you do, and for you guys who are sharing with your friends and family and teachers and all of that. It makes our day all the time. It's great.
I know, I feel like every time I get a donation, even if it's $1, I'm like dancing. It's the greatest thing. And you know what? You know what was really satisfying, Jordan? I was actually putting the slide together today before the stream, and I was like, wow, I have to resize the text. This is really cool. Like, I was really, really happy about that. Let's see, Rachel is saying, love these videos. I started taking notes whenever I watch like it's a real class. Great. I'm so happy to hear that, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you over in Discord in about 5 minutes or so.